A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Chapter 1. The crash that stole everything, soft rain hammering glass, a frantic heartbeat beneath it. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle, shrieking across the glass like they could outrun the storm itself. Rowan Vale was 24, wedged into the back seat of her parents' aging Subaru, voice rising over the roar of wind and water. Her father's knuckles glowed white on the steering wheel. Her mother kept twisting around, offering that fragile smile she always used when the world felt too heavy. "Rowan, honey, just close your eyes. We're almost—" The tires lost the road, a sickening skid, a lurch that turned gravity inside out. Metal screamed. Glass burst inward in glittering shards. Her mother's scream sliced the air and died halfway through Rowan's name. Then silence. Only the rain, drumming on the crumpled roof like impatient fists, and the thick copper scent of blood filling the upside-down car. Heavy silence, a single drop. Plink, plink. Rowan hung suspended, seatbelt biting deep into her collarbone, every breath of fresh fire in her ribs. She didn't know how long she dangled there. Long enough for cold rain to soak through her hoodie. Long enough for pain to crawl into every corner of her body and make itself at home. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. Hands reached. Voices blurred. But one scent cut clean through the gasoline and terror. Crushed pine needles, wood smoke, something wild and impossible on a lonely human highway. Rowan forced her swollen eyes open. A woman stood in the downpour, untouched by the rain, silver-streaked black hair plastered to sharp cheekbones, eyes glowing like molten moonlight. Rowan knew that face from a lifetime of barbecues, birthday parties, and hugs that always lingered a second too long. Mara Whitlock, her mother's best friend, the woman who smelled like forest and safety even when the world was ending. Mara dropped to her knees in the mud beside the wreckage. Paramedics froze mid-motion and stepped back, as if an invisible crown had just settled on her head. "Rowan," Mara breathed, the single word cracking something open inside Rowan's chest. "Oh, my sweet girl." Rowan tried to answer. Only blood came. Mara cupped her cheek with trembling hands. "Stay with me. You are not allowed to leave me too." Darkness rushed in again, swallowing everything. Soft hospital beeps, antiseptic sting in the air. When Rowan surfaced next, pain lived wrapped around her ribs like barbed wire. Monitors beeped too slowly. The room was dark except for the red exit sign bleeding across the wall. She thought she was alone. Then she saw Mara, still in the same soaked sweater, sitting forward in the vinyl chair, eyes never once leaving Rowan's face. In that crimson glow, the silver in her eyes turned to fresh blood. Rowan had seen that shimmer before. In old photographs her mother kept hidden in a shoebox under the bed. She'd always blamed it on bad flash. "Mara?" Her voice came out gravel and shattered glass. Mara surged forward, taking Rowan's hand like it might dissolve. Her palm burned fever-hot against Rowan's icy skin. "I'm here, baby." A tear slid down Mara's cheek, but she forced a trembling smile. "You're safe. My parents—" The words tasted like rust and grief. Mara's face crumpled. She pressed her forehead to Rowan's knuckles. "I'm so sorry, Rowan. They didn't make it." The monitors shrieked as Rowan's heart stuttered. A nurse burst in. Mara lifted one hand without looking, and the woman froze, then retreated like she'd been dismissed by a queen. 2 full beats of silence, only the monitors screaming. Mara climbed onto the narrow bed, hospital gown be damned, and pulled Rowan into her arms. She smelled exactly the same. Pine, wood smoke, and the electric bite of coming lightning. Rowan sobbed until her ribs screamed and her voice gave out. Mara held her so tightly Rowan could feel the thunder of a heartbeat too fast, too strong, like a war drum under human skin. When the tears finally slowed, the pain sharpened into something cold and lethal. Rowan pulled back just enough to meet Mara's gaze. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're glowing again." Mara drew a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for decades. She brushed Rowan's hair back with shaking fingers. "There are things your mother never wanted you to know. Things she begged me to keep secret." Her voice dropped to a haunted thread. "But the crash, the way it happened, it wasn't random, Rowan. Rowan stared, mind sluggish with drugs and devastation. Mara cupped Rowan's face in both hands, forcing their eyes to lock. "Your mother wasn't human," she said, soft but unbreakable, "and neither was the man who loved her enough to hide it from the world. Which means, my brave girl, you were never entirely human either." A low, guttural growl rumbled outside the window. Too deep, too wrong for any dog. The hair on Rowan's arms rose. Mara's head snapped toward the sound. Her grip turned iron. "Listen to me." Steel laced every word now. "There are things that will come for you now that your blood's awake. But you are not alone anymore. You belong to Silver Fang. You belong to me." Another growl, closer. The glass rattled in its frame. Mara leaned in until her lips brushed Rowan's ear, fierce and shaking with barely leashed fury. "They'll have to tear you out of my dead arms, baby. That's the only way." Heartbeat thundering, rain clawing at the window like it wants in. Fade out on that vow, and the shadow of something massive sliding past the streetlight outside. Chapter 2. Welcome to Silver Fang. The low thrum of a truck engine, gravel crunching under heavy tires. Cold, pine-scented wind whipping through the open window. Rowan had been out of the hospital exactly 6 hours, and the world already felt tilted on the wrong axis. Mara drove north, deeper into the mountains, past the last cell tower, past the last gas station that pretended to be a town. The road narrowed to switchbacks slick with rain, cedar, and wet earth rising up to swallow the sky. Rowan's ribs were wrapped so tight every breath felt borrowed. Painkillers turned the edges of everything soft and distant. She kept her forehead pressed to the cool passenger window, watching the forest close in like a living thing. Mara hadn't let go of her hand once. Her thumb traced the same slow, possessive circle across Rowan's knuckles, as if touch alone could keep her from shattering. "You don't have to do this," Rowan said for the 10th time, voice hoarse from tears and nightmares she couldn't quite remember. "I'm 24. I can get an apartment. There'll be insurance money." "No." The single word fell quiet but absolute, the kind that ended arguments before they began. Mara's fingers tightened. "You don't understand what's hunting you yet, Rowan. Alone out there? You wouldn't last a week." Rowan wanted to fight. She wanted answers. Instead, she stared at the endless trees and felt the hollow space where her parents used to live. The truck slowed. A massive gate rose out of the mist. Hand-forged iron twisted into the shape of a howling wolf, fangs bared at the sky. 2 shirtless sentinels stepped from the shadows to open it, bodies carved from muscle and old scars, breath fogging in the cold. Both dipped their heads to Mara with the deep reverence reserved for queens. The gate groaned wide and they rolled onto sacred ground. The first thing that hit Rowan was the scent, no longer just pine, but something richer, layered, alive. Wood smoke curling from hidden chimneys, damp earth after rain, crushed wild mint, and underneath it all, a metallic tang like a storm about to break. It flooded her lungs and sank behind her eyes like a memory she'd never earned. The second thing was the silence. No birds, no wind in the branches. Only the low collective thrum of 100 heartbeats she swore she could feel through the soles of her boots the moment she stepped down from the truck. And then the eyes. Dozens of them, gold, amber, ice blue, storm gray, fixed on her from doorways, porches, training yards. Men and women who moved with the fluid grace of predators, some half-dressed, some barefoot despite the cold. All watching her the way wolves watch a flame dancing too close to dry grass. Mara's hand settled warm and steady on the small of Rowan's back. "Chin up, fangs down," she murmured, so low only Rowan heard. "You are mine to protect. Never forget it." A woman strode forward first, tall, black, shaved head gleaming like polished onyx under the weak sun. Intricate silver tattoos of vines and claw marks wrapped her arms and throat. Authority rolled off her the way heat rolls off asphalt. "Luna," the woman said, dipping her head to Mara before turning obsidian eyes on Rowan. "So this is the Vale girl." "Rowan," Mara corrected, soft steel in her voice. "She is under my roof and my law. Spread the word, Seraphina." Seraphina's gaze traveled over the bruises blooming across Rowan's cheekbone, the careful way she held her wrapped ribs, the tremor she refused to let show. Something almost imperceptible softened in those fierce eyes. "Welcome home, Rowan," she said, and the words carried weight, like a promise carved in stone. More faces pressed closer, curious, wary, warm. A teenage boy with hearing aids flashed a mischievous grin and signed something too quick for Rowan to follow. Twin redheads, Maya and Liv, leaned into each other, arms looped, identical smirks sharp enough to cut. An older man with salt and pepper braids offered a battered thermos that smelled of hot cider laced with whiskey. Rowan took it because her hands were ice. The first swallow burned sweet and perfect down her raw throat. Then she saw him, Cassian Whitlock. He leaned against the railing of the largest cabin like he'd grown there, arms folded, dark hair longer now, curling against the collar of his flannel, same storm-gray eyes that once dared her to climb higher trees when they were 10. Only now he stood 6'4", shoulders broad enough to block the wind, grief etched quiet and deep around his mouth when his gaze found hers. He pushed off the railing and crossed the clearing in 4 ground-eating strides. Rowan braced herself for words, for pity. Instead, he simply opened his arms. She fell into them like the earth falling into gravity. Cassian smelled of cedar shavings, gun oil, and something that made her throat close. He held her with deliberate care, as if her bones might crumble, one large hand cradling the back of her head. "I've got you," he whispered against her hair. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." She hadn't known there were any tears left. When he finally released her, the pack had formed a loose, protective circle, close enough to feel their warmth, far enough to pretend it was space. An elder stepped forward, tiny, East Asian, face carved by decades of moonlit nights. She studied Rowan with frost-pale eyes. "A human on sacred ground," she said, voice soft but carrying to the tree line. "The goddess must have her reasons." Another elder, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, added with a wry smile, "Or she's testing how far we've truly come." Murmurs rippled, approving, skeptical, curious. Mara's hand returned to Rowan's spine. "Rowan trains with the warriors. She eats at my table. She is pack. Anyone who forgets answers to me and to the Alpha when he returns." The threat landed like a thrown blade. Silence dropped heavy and instant. Then Seraphina's grin flashed white and sudden. "Well then, let's see what the human's made of." They led her to the training circle, packed earth ringed by unlit torches, though daylight still clung to the sky. Someone tossed her borrowed gear, leather bracers, a practice blade heavier than sin. Painkillers and adrenaline sang in her blood. The second her boots hit the dirt, something ancient and furious woke inside her chest. A cocky young wolf, 19, all swagger and sharp canines, stepped in to test her. He smirked. "Try not to cry when I—" Rowan never let him finish. 3 years of kickboxing, grief forged into muscle memory, and a lifetime of refusing to be anyone's prey. She feinted left, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, swept his legs while he gasped. He hit the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. The practice blade kissed his throat before he could roll. Dead. Silence. Then the circle exploded. Cheers, laughter, a few appreciative whistles. Cassian's smile was slow, proud, and quietly heartbroken. Seraphina threw her head back and laughed like rolling thunder. "Oh, I like her!" Rowan stood shaking with endorphins, sweat stinging the cut on her cheek when the wind shifted. A new scent sliced through everything. Cold iron, winter night, something dark and ravenous. Every wolf in the clearing froze mid-breath. Head snapped toward the tree line. Cassian moved half a step in front of her, body coiled. Mara's eyes bled molten silver. Far beyond human sight, something watched. Rowan felt it like teeth grazing the nape of her neck. The scent lingered, 1 heartbeat, 2, then vanished. But the message had been delivered. Someone had just drawn a line in the dirt, and Rowan was standing on the wrong side of it. Low, haunting note, wind hissing through the pines like a warning. Chapter 3. The bond that wasn't supposed to happen. Night wind through tall pines, a single drumbeat, slow and primal, fading into the hush of 1,000 held breaths. The full moon hung low and swollen, so bright it bleached the color from the world. Rowan stood on the ridge above the clearing, wrapped in one of Mara's borrowed coats. The fur-lined hood pulled up against the bite of mountain air. Below her, Silver Fang gathered for the run. Wolves poured from cabins and shadows, shedding clothes like old skins. Bodies shimmered, bones cracked, fur spilled over muscle in liquid waves of silver, black, and tawny gold. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the low thunder of shifting. Rowan's pulse hammered in her throat. She had no place here. She had every place here. Mara had insisted she watch from the ridge tonight. No arguments, no exceptions. "This is who we are," the Luna had said, voice soft but unyielding. "If you're going to live among us, you need to see the truth with your own eyes." So Rowan watched. Cassian shifted first among the younger wolves, his massive frame folding and unfolding into a storm-gray beast with the same gentle eyes. He glanced up at the ridge, found her, and dipped his great head once before melting into the pack. Seraphina became a sleek black wolf with silver markings that mirrored her tattoos. Maya and Liv turned together, twin auburn wolves tumbling over each other like pups before vanishing into the trees. The pack surged forward as one living tide, a river of muscle and moonlight, and the forest swallowed them whole. Rowan's chest ached with something too big for words: beauty, grief, belonging, exile, all braided together. She was still staring after them, breath fogging in the cold, when the wind changed. A new scent slammed into her like a physical blow. Cold iron, dark cedar, winter night laced with something feral and starving. Her knees buckled. The ridge suddenly felt too exposed, too high, too alone. She gripped the rough bark of a pine to stay upright as every hair on her body lifted. Down in the clearing, far beyond the last torch, a lone wolf stepped from the tree line, bigger than any Silver Fang wolf. Black as the new moon, built like war-made flesh. A single silver scar cut through the fur over his left eye, catching the moonlight like a blade. He moved with lethal stillness, each step deliberate, until he stood in the exact center of the empty clearing. Then he lifted his head and looked straight at her. Across 200 yards of night, their eyes locked. Rowan's heart stopped. The world narrowed to a single, impossible point of contact. A golden thread snapped taut inside her chest, hot, unbreakable, alive. It yanked the air from her lungs. It flooded her veins with molten starlight. It whispered a single word she felt more than heard: mine. The black wolf's ears flicked. His body shuddered once, violently, as if the same thread had just flayed him open. For one endless second, neither of them moved. Then the scar over his eye flashed silver again, and he turned. He vanished into the trees without a sound. Rowan was on her knees before she realized she'd fallen. Her palms scraped against stone, lungs burning. Tears she didn't remember crying freezing on her cheeks. The bond Mara had warned her about bonds, about fated mates, about how rare and sacred and dangerous they could be, had spoken of them like fairy tales wrapped in caution tape. Rowan had laughed, actually laughed 2 days ago when Mara tried to explain. There was no laughter now, only the echo of that single word still ringing through every cell in her body: mine, and the colder, sharper truth clawing right behind it. He didn't want it either. She felt his rejection like a slap, felt him rip himself away from the thread and run. Run from her. Run from what the moon had just decided they were. Rowan pressed both hands to her sternum, trying to hold the pieces of herself together, trying to breathe around the sudden, yawning hollow where something ancient had just carved its name. Footsteps crunched behind her. Cassian, back in human form, sweat-slicked and barefoot, concern etched deep. "Rowan?" His voice was rough from the shift. "You're shaking. What happened?" She couldn't answer. She couldn't even look at him, because the scent still lingered on the wind, cold iron and winter night, and her traitor body leaned toward it like a flower toward the sun. Cassian followed her gaze to the empty clearing, nostrils flaring. His whole body went rigid. "Iron Hollow," he snarled under his breath. "That was Dante Vargas." Rowan closed her eyes. The name settled in her bones like a brand. Dante Vargas, alpha of the most feared pack on the continent. The wolf who had looked at her once and walked away. The wolf who had just shattered her world without saying a single word. Somewhere deep in the forest, a lone howl rose, raw, furious, aching. It wasn't Silver Fang. Rowan's own throat burned with the need to answer. She bit down on the sound until she tasted blood. Cassian's hand settled on her shoulder. Warm, familiar, safe. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you inside." She let him lead her down the ridge, legs numb, heart a riot of fire and ice. But with every step, the golden thread pulled tighter. And somewhere out there in the dark, Dante Vargas was running just as hard in the opposite direction. Neither of them stood a chance. Low, haunting piano note. Wind rising to a whisper that almost sounds like a name. Chapter 4. Rules of a broken game. The crackle of a morning fire. A raven's harsh cry overhead. Something heavy lands on wood with a soft, deliberate thud. Rowan woke to the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. 3 days had passed since the full moon run. 3 days of pretending the golden thread inside her chest didn't exist. 3 days of training until her muscles screamed, of eating at Mara's table with forced smiles, of falling into bed too exhausted to dream. It hadn't worked. She still tasted cold iron every time she closed her eyes. She still woke reaching for a presence that had never been there. This morning, the knock on her cabin door came before sunrise. Serafina stood on the porch, face grim, holding a small wooden box the size of a heart. "This was left nailed to the border oak at dawn," the beta said, voice flat with barely leashed fury. "Addressed to you. Smells like him." Rowan's stomach dropped. She already knew what was inside before she lifted the lid. A single black raven feather, glossy as spilled oil, tied with a thin red cord. At its base, a knot shaped like an old-fashioned noose, and beneath it, carved into the lid in sharp, brutal letters, "Claim or war, no signature needed." Every wolf within 20 miles would recognize the scent clinging to the wood. Winter night, dark cedar, and the unmistakable bite of iron hollow steel. Rowan's fingers closed around the feather before she could stop herself. The instant her skin touched it, the bond flared. Hot, vicious, alive, sending a jolt straight between her legs and upper spine. She hissed and dropped it like it burned. Serafina watched her with unreadable eyes. "The council meets in 1 hour," she said quietly. "Mara wants you there." Rowan laughed, short, sharp, humorless. "Of course she does." An hour later, the longhouse was packed. Elders sat in a semicircle of carved chairs. Warriors lined the walls, arms crossed, tension thick enough to taste. Mara stood at the head of the table. Elias, her mate and the Silver Fang Alpha, beside her, freshly returned from diplomatic travels. He was a mountain of a man, silver threading his dark beard, eyes the same storm gray as his son's. Cassian leaned against the far wall, jaw tight, gaze fixed on Rowan like he was afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. The black feather lay in the center of the table like a loaded gun. Elias broke the silence first. "Dante Vargas has never issued a mating ultimatum before," he said, voice low and dangerous. "He's 31 years old, unmated by choice, and has buried 3 challengers who tried to force the issue. Why now? Why her?" All eyes turned to Rowan. She lifted her chin. "Because the bond doesn't give a damn what either of us wants." A ripple went through the room, part shock, part hunger. True mates were myth to most of them, legend, something elders spoke of in hushed tones around solstice fires. Mara's gaze softened with pity and pride in equal measure. "Then we protect our own," she said simply. "Rowan is Silver Fang now. No one takes her against her will." Rowan's laugh cracked again. "You don't get it. He doesn't want to take me. He wants me to refuse so he can justify war. He's giving me the choice so it's my fault when blood spills." Silence fell like an axe. Cassian pushed off the wall. "Then we give him a different answer," he said, voice rough. "We double patrols. We call in alliances. We make the cost too high." Elias studied his son, then Rowan. Something ancient and calculating moving behind his eyes. "Or," he said slowly, "we remind Dante Vargas that some prizes bite back." Rowan felt the shift in the room. The moment the pack decided she was worth bleeding for, it should have felt like armor. Instead, it felt like chains. That afternoon, she trained harder than ever. She sparred until her knuckles split inside the wraps, until Serafina finally called a stop with a proud, approving grin. She ran the perimeter trails until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She was punishing her body for wanting something her mind had already rejected. Night fell cold and star-drunk. Rowan sat on the porch steps of her little cabin, bruised, aching, furious. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then the wind shifted. That scent again, cold iron and winter night, curling around her like smoke. She was on her feet before she made the decision to move. He stood at the edge of the trees, just outside the torchlight. Human this time. Dante Vargas filled the darkness like he'd been born from it. 6'6", maybe more. Shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of entire winters. Black hair fell too long, brushing the collar of a worn leather jacket. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow and down his cheek caught the moonlight like a slash of silver. He didn't step into the light. He didn't need to. The bond roared between them, golden and violent, dragging Rowan 2 steps forward before she locked her knees. Dante's eyes, pale gray, ringed in molten gold, never left her face. His voice rolled out low, smoke over gravel. "Run all you like, little human." A pause, heavy as a heartbeat. "The bond doesn't care." Rowan's hands curled into fists. "Then tell it to go to hell," she spat. "I'm not a treaty, I'm not a weapon, and I'm sure as hell not yours." Something flickered across his face, too fast to name. Pain, hunger, both? He took 1 step closer, boots silent on pine needles. "I don't want a mate," he said, each word carved out and bleeding. "I've watched what the bond does. It makes monsters of men. I'd rather die alone than become my father." Rowan's breath caught. The raw honesty in his voice sliced deeper than any threat. She hated that it did. "Then we're in agreement," she managed. "Stay away from me. Stay away from my pack." Dante's mouth twisted. Not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. "I'm trying, Rowan Vale." His voice dropped to something dangerously soft. "Goddess help me, I'm trying." Then he was gone. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves. Just the sudden, brutal absence of his scent and the echo of his last words hanging in the air like smoke. Rowan stood frozen on the porch long after the forest swallowed him. The black feather was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, turned it over in trembling fingers. The red cord looked like fresh blood in the moonlight. She whispered to the night, to the bond, to the man who had just walked away from her a second time. "Then I'll break it myself." Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, low, and heartbroken. And for the first time since the crash, Rowan wasn't sure whose pain she was hearing. Chapter 5. Midnight on neutral ground. Thunder rolling in the distance. Heavy rain on rusted tin roof. The low creak of old wood settling under a storm. The abandoned lumber mill sat exactly on the border between Silver Fang and Iron Hollow territory. Neutral ground by ancient treaty. Forgotten by humans, claimed by no pack. Rowan shouldn't have come. She knew it the second Cassian's handwritten note slid under her door at dusk. Old mill. Midnight. Come alone. He asked for you by name. See Cassian, who had looked sick when he wrote it. Rowan came anyway. She wore black jeans, black boots, and the leather jacket Serafina had pressed into her hands with a muttered, "Try not to die, human." A silver dagger was strapped to her thigh, more for comfort than any real hope it would help. The storm broke just as she reached the mill. Rain lashed sideways, turning the world into watercolor gray. Lightning forked overhead, illuminating rotting beams and broken windows like the ribs of some ancient beast. Rowan stepped through the splintered doorway, and he was already there. Dante Vargas stood in the center of the cavernous room, coat open, shirt soaked through and clinging to every hard line of his chest. Water dripped from his black hair, traced the scar that cut through his brow, and fell from his jaw like tears he would never allow. He didn't move when she entered. He simply watched her with those storm-ringed eyes, predator still. Thunder cracked so hard the floor shook. Rowan stopped 10 feet away, close enough to feel the heat rolling off him, despite the cold, far enough to keep the dagger in reach. "You wanted to talk," she said, voice steady even though her heart was trying to claw out of her chest. "Talk!" Dante's gaze dragged over her slowly, lingering on the bruise fading along her collarbone, the way rain plastered loose strands of hair to her throat. When he finally spoke, the words came out rough, like they'd been dragged over broken glass. "I was there the night your parents died." The world tilted. Rowan's breath left her in a rush. The golden thread snapped taut between them, vicious and bright, punishing her for every inch of distance. Lightning flashed again, painting them both in stark white. She took one involuntary step forward. "What did you just say?" Dante didn't flinch. "I was tracking a rogue that had crossed into human territory. I saw the car lose control, saw the ice that shouldn't have been there." His jaw flexed. "I smelled the magic on it. Old blood magic. Someone wanted them dead. And they wanted you alive and alone." Rowan's knees threatened to fold. Every alarm bell in her head screamed at her to run, to scream, to pull the dagger and bury it in his throat. Instead, she whispered, "Why didn't you stop it?" Dante's eyes closed for a single heartbeat. "Because by the time I reached the wreck, I scented you." His voice dropped to something raw and ruined. "And the bond hit me so hard I nearly shifted in the middle of the highway. I couldn't think, couldn't move. All I knew was mine, 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 and your parents were already—" He cut himself off, throat working. Rowan's vision blurred with rain and tears she refused to let fall. "You let them die," she said, barely sound. "I was a coward," he answered, the confession torn out of him like a blade from flesh. "I ran, because if I stayed, I would have taken you right there in the mud, half dead and grieving, and I would have hated myself for the rest of my life." Silence fell, broken only by the storm. Rowan's hand found the hilt of the dagger, fingers trembling. Dante watched the movement, unafraid. "Do it," he said quietly. "If it makes the pain stop, do it. I deserve it." The bond roared between them, golden and molten, wrapping around her wrist, trying to force her fingers open, trying to drag her across the 10 feet that separated them. Rowan's breath hitched on something that might have been a sob. She took a step, then another, until only inches remained. Rain hammered the tin roof like 1,000 angry fists. Lightning flashed again, and in that frozen second, Rowan slapped him. The crack echoed through the mill like a gunshot. Dante's head snapped to the side, blood blooming instantly at the corner of his mouth. He didn't move to stop her. He let her. Let the sting bloom across his cheek. Let the storm drown them both. Rowan's palm burned. Tears finally spilled, hot against cold rain. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know," he whispered back. Thunder rolled, long and low. And then, because the bond was cruel and the night was crueler, Rowan's trembling fingers rose again, not to strike, but to touch. She traced the blood at the corner of his mouth. Dante shuddered, violently, like a man taking a bullet. His hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and covered hers, pressing her palm to his cheek. Skin to skin. The bond exploded. Golden fire poured through every point of contact, lighting every nerve, stealing every thought. Rowan's gasp was swallowed by the storm. Dante's forehead dropped to hers, both of them shaking, breathing the same ragged air. "I'm sorry," he rasped against her lips. Not quite a kiss, closer to a prayer. "I'm so sorry." Rowan's other hand fisted in his soaked shirt, anchoring, punishing, kneading. She didn't kiss him. She couldn't. Not yet. But she didn't pull away either. The storm raged harder, as if the sky itself was furious at them for standing on the edge and not falling. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw, barely audible over the rain. "Stay away from me, Alpha." Dante's grip tightened for one heartbreaking second. Then his fingers slid away, leaving her palm cold where his skin had been. "I'm trying, Rowan," he said, voice broken open. "Goddess help me, I'm trying." He stepped back into the shadows. One moment he was there, close enough to taste. The next, only the echo of his scent and the ghost of his heat. Rowan stood alone in the ruined mill, hands still raised, palms stinging, heart a riot of grief and want and rage. The golden thread pulled tighter than ever. And somewhere out in the dark, Dante Vargas was bleeding from more than just his lip. Thunder fades to a low, wounded growl. Rain softens to a whisper. Chapter 6. The Price of Denial. Low, feverish breathing, a clock ticking too loud, the distant mournful howl of a wolf that never quite fades. Rowan woke burning, not the dull ache of bruised ribs or overworked muscles. This was deeper, hotter, a molten tide rolling under her skin, licking along every nerve until the sheets felt like sandpaper, and the air itself was too heavy to breathe. She kicked free of the blankets with a strangled sound. Moonlight spilled through the cabin window, silver and merciless, painting the room in cold fire. Her vision pulsed at the edges. She staggered to the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Cheeks flushed crimson, lips swollen and bitten raw, eyes too wide, pupils blown, ringed in fever gold that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. A nosebleed started without warning, bright red dripping onto the pine floorboards. She pressed the heel of her hand to her nose and laughed once. A cracked, desperate sound. Bond sickness, Mara had warned her. Denying a true mate too long does things to the body, the Luna had said, voice gentle and terrible. Fever, bleeding, pain that feels like dying. And dreams. Dreams that aren't dreams. Rowan had rolled her eyes then. She wasn't rolling them now. The first wave hit her so hard she went to her knees. It wasn't pain exactly. It was need, raw, animal, humiliating, rolling through her in relentless surges that tightened low in her belly and stole every rational thought. She could smell him, cold iron and winter night, even though he was hundreds of miles away. She could taste him on the back of her tongue. Rowan crawled to the bathroom, turned the shower to ice, and stood under it fully clothed until her teeth chattered and the water ran red-brown from her nose. It didn't help. Nothing helped. By dawn, half the pack knew. Serafina found her curled on the porch at sunrise, soaked, shaking, eyes glassy. "Goddess girl," the beta whispered, kneeling. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" Rowan couldn't answer. Her tongue felt too thick, her skin too tight. Words spread like wildfire. By noon, the borders were crawling with Iron Hollow scouts, close enough to be seen, far enough to stay legal. By dusk, Elias had called every ally within 1,000 miles. War drums were beating, and Rowan was losing the fight with her own body. Cassian came to her cabin that night. He hadn't slept. The shadows under his eyes were bruises. He stood in the doorway, fists clenched, voice barely controlled. "I can't watch you die for him," he said, raw and shaking. "I won't." Rowan looked up from where she sat on the floor, back against the bed frame, knees drawn to her chest. She was pale now, fever broken into cold sweats, lips bloodless. "I'm not dying for him," she rasped. "I'm dying because of him." Cassian crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her. His hands hovered, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "I've loved you since we were kid," he said, the confession torn out of him like shrapnel. Quietly, hopelessly. "I never said it because you were human, and I thought one day you'd choose this life anyway. Choose me." Rowan's eyes filled. Cassian leaned in, slow enough that she could have stopped him. She didn't. His mouth found hers, soft at first, then desperate, tasting of salt and heartbreak. For one heartbeat, the fever eased. For one heartbeat, the golden thread went quiet. Then it snapped back twice as hard, punishing, possessive, furious. Rowan jerked away with a cry, hands flying to her sternum, as if she could claw the bond out of her chest. Cassian's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, I can't." He stood, jaw locked so tight she heard the click of bone. "I know," he said hoarsely. "I always knew." He left without another word. The door closed with a gentleness that felt worse than any slam. Rowan stayed on the floor, arms wrapped around herself, rocking like a child. The fever climbed higher. Dreams bled into waking. She saw Dante in the dark, eyes wild, fists bleeding from punching trees to splinters. She felt his rage, his guilt, his own sickness mirroring hers. She felt him fighting the pull just as hard, and losing. At 3:17 a.m., she woke screaming his name. The sound tore out of her throat before she could stop it, raw, broken, pleading. Every wolf in the compound heard it. Mara burst through the door first, Elias right behind her. Rowan was on her hands and knees in the middle of the room, hair plastered to her face with sweat and tears, gasping. "He's killing me," she sobbed. "He's not even here, and he's killing me." Mara knelt, gathering Rowan against her chest like she had in the hospital. "Shh, baby. Breathe." "I can't," Rowan choked. "I can't breathe without him, and I hate him, and I—" Another nosebleed started. Elias's face was grim as Winterstone. "He's coming," the Alpha said quietly. "Border Scouts just reported Iron Hollow wolves massing. Dante's either coming to claim you or coming to watch you die so the bond can't be used against him anymore." Rowan laughed, a wet wreck sound. "Then he's too late," she whispered, "because I'm already gone." Outside, the wind rose to a howl, and somewhere, impossibly far and yet too close, a black wolf lifted his head to the moon and roared until the mountains themselves trembled. The bond was done waiting. Single heartbeat, then another, faster, louder, until it drowns everything else. Chapter 7. Taken by the enemy, the low, rhythmic thud of boots on wet earth. Rain again, but colder now, chains clinking softly in the dark. Rowan never heard them come. One moment she was stumbling along the supply trail, fever burning so hot the forest spun around her, clutching a basket of healing herbs Kale had forced into her hands with a worried frown. The next moment the world went black, a sweet chemical cloth over her mouth, strong arms banding around her ribs, a voice low and apologetic against her ear. Luna's orders were clear: bring her alive. The Alpha's losing his mind. Then nothing. When consciousness clawed its way back, she was moving, fast, slung over a broad shoulder like a sack of grain. The scent that flooded her lungs was winter night and cold iron, so thick it drowned the fever and replaced it with something worse. Need. She tried to fight, limbs heavy, drugs still dragging at the edges of her mind, but the body carrying her only tightened its grip. "Easy, Fireheart," a familiar voice rumbled, rough with strain. "I've got you." Dante. Rowan's heart stuttered. She managed one weak fist against his back before the drugs and the bond pulled her under again. She woke the second time in a room carved from stone and shadow. Iron Hollow's stronghold. The bed beneath her was massive, furs and dark linens, smelling overwhelmingly of him. One of her wrists was encircled by a thin silver cuff chained to the headboard, not tight enough to bruise, just enough to keep her from falling if the fever took her again. The chain was long enough that she could reach the bathroom, the fireplace, the window that looked out over a jagged ravine, long enough to remind her she was a prisoner, but not long enough to run. Dante stood across the room, back to her, shoulders rigid beneath a black shirt rolled to the elbows. His knuckles were split and bleeding, like he'd been hitting something that refused to break. He didn't turn when the chain rattled. Rowan sat up slowly, head pounding, throat raw. "You kidnapped me," she croaked. Dante's spine stiffened further. "I had you retrieved," he corrected, voice scraped raw. "There's a difference. Tell that to the chain." That earned a flinch. He turned then. Goddess. He looked worse than she felt. Eyes bloodshot, cheekbones sharp with exhaustion, the scar over his eye standing out livid white against skin gone too pale. His hands shook faintly at his sides. "You were dying," he said, each word carved out and bleeding. "Silver Fang healers couldn't stop it. I could smell your blood from 50 miles away. If I left you there another day—" He broke off, jaw clenching so hard she heard the click. Rowan lifted her chained wrist. "So you fixed it with kidnapping and bondage." "Very romantic." A muscle jumped in his cheek. "The chain is silver-laced," he said quietly. "It dampens the bond sickness. Keeps you lucid. Keeps you alive." His gaze dropped to the cuff, then away. Like it burned him to look at it. "It's the only thing that worked on my mother when my father—" He stopped again, throat working. Rowan's anger faltered. She remembered whispers from Silver Fang elders. Dante's human mother, driven mad by a bond her alpha refused to gentle, dying slow and screaming while her son watched. Rowan looked at the chain again. Not punishment, mercy. She hated that it made sense. Dante took one careful step closer, then another until he stood at the foot of the bed. "I won't force the claim," he said, voice low, fierce. "I swear on my life, Rowan. Not while you're sick, not while you hate me, not ever if that's what you choose." He knelt slowly, deliberately, bringing himself lower than her, the most feared alpha on the continent, on his knees. "I took you because I couldn't watch you die," he whispered. "That's all." Rowan's throat closed. The bond hummed between them, softer now, almost grateful. She hated that too. Silence stretched, thick with rain and unsaid things. Then Rowan did the last thing either of them expected. She moved. Chain clinking softly, she slid forward on the bed until her knees bumped his chest. Dante froze, barely breathing. Rowan reached out with her free hand, slow enough that he could have stopped her 100 times. He didn't. Her fingers brushed the raised scar that cut through his left brow, tracing it down to where it ended at the corner of his mouth. His breath shuddered out of him. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice barely sound. Dante's eyes closed. "My father," he said at last. "The night he realized the bond had chosen a human for me, he tried to carve it out of my face so I'd never forget what weakness looks like." Rowan's heart cracked open. Her thumb brushed the scar again, gentler this time. Dante leaned into the touch like a man starving. The chain sang between them as Rowan shifted closer. She didn't kiss him, but she let her forehead rest against his, just for a moment. Just long enough for both of them to breathe the same air. "I still hate you," she whispered against his skin. "I know," he whispered back, voice ragged. "Hate me all you want, Fireheart. Just live." Outside, thunder rolled across the ravine, like the sky itself was weeping. Inside, the chain no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the only thing keeping them both from falling. Soft clink of silver, a single heartbeat. Then another, slower, matching. Chapter 8. The truth in the ashes. Low crackle of a dying fire. Rain reduced to a whisper against stone. Two heartbeats, no longer fighting the same rhythm. The chain had gone warm from her skin. Rowan sat on the edge of Dante's bed, legs dangling over the side, the silver cuff resting against her thigh like it belonged there. Across from her, Dante remained on his knees, forehead still pressed to hers, eyes closed, breathing her in the way drowning men breathe air. Minutes bled into hours. Neither moved to break the contact. Finally, Rowan pulled back just far enough to see his face. The scar looked silver in the firelight. His lashes were wet. "Tell me the rest," she said, voice hoarse from screaming and fever, and truths she wasn't ready to carry. "About your mother." Dante's shoulders rose and fell once, a shudder he couldn't hide. He didn't stand. He simply shifted back to sit on the floor, back against the footboard, long legs stretched out, and began to speak like a man ripping stitches out one by one. "My father was alpha before me, crueler than I'll ever be, stronger than anyone thought possible, until the bond chose a human school teacher from the valley." His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but every word bled. She was soft-spoken, loved poetry, wore cardigans with little cat pins. He brought her here the way you bring home a war prize. Rowan's stomach turned. Dante stared at the fire. She fought the bond at first, said she had a life, a fiancé, a job. He laughed and locked her in this very room, told her the moon had spoken. That was that. A muscle jumped in his jaw. She got sick the way you got sick. Worse. My father decided pain would make her submit faster. Silver chains, isolation. He thought if he broke her body, her soul would follow. Rowan's free hand curled into a fist on the furs. She lasted 11 months, Dante said. I was 9 when she died. She used to sing to me through the door when he wasn't here. Old lullabies. Her voice got smaller every week. He swallowed hard. The last time I saw her alive, she made me promise never to let the bond turn me into him. Then she bit through her own tongue, so he couldn't force the claim while she was unconscious. Silence fell like a blade. Rowan tasted copper in her own mouth. Dante finally looked at her. I swore I'd rather die mateless than become that monster. I built walls out of bodies and blood so high no bond could ever climb them, and then the moon sent you. Rowan's eyes burned. She slid off the bed without thinking. The chain sang, soft and bright, as she lowered herself to the floor in front of him. Dante watched her like she was a mirage that might vanish if he breathed wrong. Rowan reached out, slow, deliberate, and cupped his face with both hands, one warm, one tethered by silver. You are not your father, she said, fierce and shaking. You chained me to keep me alive, not to break me. You knelt. He never would have. Something fractured behind Dante's eyes. Rowan felt it happen inside her own chest too. She leaned in. The kiss wasn't soft. It was angry, grieving, grateful, terrified. Teeth scraped. A low growl rumbled in Dante's throat, half warning, half surrender. Rowan kissed him harder. She tasted blood and rain, and every apology he'd never been allowed to speak. Dante's hands came up to grip her hips, desperate but careful, like she was made of glass and fire at the same time. The chain clinked between them with every breath. Rowan pulled back just enough to rest her forehead against his again. I'm still furious at you, she whispered against his lips. I know, he whispered back, voice wrecked. I still don't trust you. I know. But I'm done letting ghosts decide what happens to my body. Dante's grip tightened, trembling. Rowan kissed him again, slower this time, deliberate. She shifted, straddling his lap without breaking contact, knees sinking into thick furs. The chain stretched to its limit, silver links catching firelight like stars. Dante's hands slid up her back, mapping every vertebra like he was memorizing a prayer. Rowan's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling just hard enough to make him groan. The bond sang between them, golden and liquid, no longer punishing, just claiming. Clothes peeled away in frantic silence, shirt buttons scattering like hail. Skin met skin. Rowan arched into him with a broken sound that was half sob, half relief. Dante's mouth found the hollow beneath her ear, her collarbone, the frantic pulse at her throat. Every touch was worship and apology and promise. When he finally slid inside her, they both stilled, shaking, breathing each other's air. Rowan's chained hand came up to cradle his jaw. Look at me, she ordered, voice raw. Dante's eyes opened, gold swallowing gray. I choose this, she said. I choose you. Not the bond, not the moon. Me. Something wild and reverent broke across his face. He kissed her like a vow. They moved together slow, deliberate, chasing healing more than pleasure. The chain sang with every thrust, a bright, defiant melody. When release came, it shattered them both, quiet and devastating, tears mixing with sweat, names spilling like prayers. After they stayed tangled on the floor, furs pulled over them, the chain draped across both their hearts like it had always belonged there. Rowan's fingers traced lazy circles over the scar on his chest she hadn't noticed before, an old burn shaped like a claiming bite gone wrong. Dante's lips brushed her temple. Stay, he whispered, so soft she almost missed it. Rowan closed her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Not tonight. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It was a beginning. Where hours later, just before dawn, the door opened without a knock. A Silver Fang elder stood in the threshold, face carved from winter. In her hand, a small wooden box. Inside, a single photograph, edges singed like it had been pulled from a fire. Rowan's mother, young and laughing, standing beside a man who was definitely not Rowan's father. On the back in faded ink, he would have burned the world to keep you safe. I chose the world. Forgive me. Monsieur Rowan's breath left her in a rush. Dante's arms tightened around her from behind, reading over her shoulder. The elder's voice was gentle iron. Your mother rejected her true mate to protect you from the war that would have come if she'd taken her place as Luna of Nightspire. She paid with her life. The crash wasn't an accident. They finally found her. Rowan stared at the photograph until the faces blurred. Dante pressed his lips to the scar the bond had left on her soul. Then we finish what she started, he said against her skin, voice steady as stone. No more running. No more cages. Rowan turned in his arms, the chains sliding cool between them. She kissed him once, fierce and final. Together, she said. Outside, the first light of morning bled across the ravine, painting the world in fire and gold. And for the first time since the crash, Rowan wasn't afraid of what came next. Soft clink of silver unlocking, a key turning, 2 heartbeats finally beating as one. Chapter 9. Break the bond or break the world. A blood-red moon rising over the ancient circle. Wind screaming through standing stones like a warning no one heeded. The ritual circle lay in the no-man's land where 3 territories bled into one another. Silver Fang, Iron Hollow, and the blackened scar left by Nightspire centuries ago. 13 standing stones, each taller than a wolf on hind legs, carved with runes that hurt to look at directly. Tonight they glowed the color of fresh slaughter. Rowan stood barefoot in the center, wearing nothing but a thin white shift that whipped around her legs like a ghost trying to escape. The silver cuff was gone. The chain was gone. Only the bond remained, golden and vicious, wrapped around her heart like barbed wire. Around the circle, 2 armies faced each other across frost-hard ground. Silver Fang on the left, Mara and Elias, shoulder to shoulder, Seraphina's teeth bared, Cassian's eyes fixed on Rowan like she was the only star left in his sky. Iron Hollow on the right, Dante's wolves, black banners snapping in the wind, their alphas standing at the very edge of the stones, fists clenched so tight blood dripped from his palms. Between them, Nightspire elders in bone-white robes, faces hidden, chanting in a language that tasted like rust. In Rowan's right hand, a ritual dagger, silver and moonstone, forged for one purpose only. Sever the bond, kill the thread, free them both, or kill one of them trying. The head elder's voice rose above the wind. Rowan Vale, daughter of the rejected Luna, step forward and choose. Rowan's legs moved without permission. Every step felt like walking across broken glass. The bond screamed inside her chest, a living thing clawing to keep what it had claimed. Dante took one involuntary step toward her, boots scraping stone. His wolves growled warning. Elias's hand clamped on Cassian's shoulder, holding him back. Rowan stopped at the center altar, a slab of black obsidian veined with silver. The dagger trembled in her grip. The elder spoke again, cold and final. Speak the words. Cut the thread. End this madness before war consumes us all. Rowan looked up. First at Cassian. His face was wet. He didn't bother hiding it. I love you, he mouthed, soundless. Whatever you choose, I love you. The words were knives. She turned to Dante. He was shaking, not with fear, with the effort of staying still. His eyes blazed gold, wolf and man both begging. Rowan's voice cracked across the circle. I was told I had 2 choices, she said, loud enough for every wolf to hear. Accept the bond and lose myself, or sever it and lose him. She lifted the dagger higher. The moon bled brighter. But no one asked what I actually want. Silence fell so complete the wind itself seemed to die. Rowan turned the blade, not toward the invisible thread between her and Dante, toward her own palm. The dagger sliced clean, blood welled, hot and bright, dripping onto the obsidian in thick, deliberate drops. Nightspire elders lunged forward. Too late. Rowan pressed her bleeding hand flat to the altar and spoke words that weren't in any ritual they knew. I reject the old law. I reject forced claims. I reject cages disguised as fate. This bond is mine as much as his, and I rewrite it. Power exploded outward. Not golden, white, blinding, searing, pure. Every wolf in the circle dropped to their knees, human and shifted alike, as the runes on the stones shattered like glass. The bond inside Rowan's chest flared once, agonizing, then reshaped. No longer barbed wire, now a circle. 2 strands braided willingly, equally unbreakable because they chose to be. Rowan staggered. Dante was there before she hit the ground, catching her, arms banding around her like he'd die before letting go again. His voice was wrecked. What did you just do? Rowan laughed, wet and wild, blood still dripping between their joined hands. "I kept you," she whispered. "And I kept me." Cassian made a sound like something inside him had snapped in half. Mara's hand covered her mouth, tears falling freely. The Nightspire elder who had spoken stared at the ruined stones, then at Rowan, something like awe breaking across his ancient face. "The goddess," she answered. Rowan turned in Dante's arms, facing both packs. Her voice carried, steady now, fierce and final. "No more forced claims. No more ultimatums. Any wolf, alpha, omega, human, gets to choose. Or there will be no alliance, no peace, only war. And I will burn every territory that tries to chain another soul to the ground before I let it happen again." She looked straight at Cassian, his eyes closed. He bowed his head, accepting. Then slowly every Silver Fang wolf followed. One by one Iron Hollow followed. The circle was complete. Rowan sagged against Dante, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. He lifted her into his arms, cradling her bloody hand like it was made of starlight. The blood-red moon began to pale. Dante pressed his lips to her temple. "Fireheart," he whispered, voice raw with wonder and terror and love. "You just rewrote the world." Rowan's eyes fluttered shut. "Good," she murmured, already slipping toward sleep. It needed a better story. Behind them, the standing stones crumbled to dust, and for the first time in centuries the wind carried no scent of war. Only the wild, impossible smell of a future no one had dared to imagine. Soft exhale, a single drop of blood hits stone and steams away into nothing. The moon fades to silver. Chapter 10. The Luna Who Chose Herself. A cold dawn wind sweeping across the ridge. The low rolling thunder of hundreds of paws on frost-hard earth. Two heartbeats now perfectly matched. The war never came. Instead, spring arrived early the year Rowan Vale broke the world open and built a better one in its place. 1 year later. The ridge above the United Territory, once the tense border between Silver Fang and Iron Hollow, now belonged to no single pack and to every wolf at once. Rowan stood at the very edge, barefoot in soft leather trousers and a sleeveless black tunic, wind tugging loose strands from her braid. The claiming bite on the curve of her neck and shoulder had healed into a raised silver scar shaped like a crescent moon. Dante's mark, chosen, accepted, returned. Behind her, the largest full moon run in living memory gathered. Wolves of every color poured from the trees. Silver, black, auburn, storm gray, white. Pups tumbled over each other. Elders watched with wet eyes. Young wolves shifted for the first time, laughing and crying at once. There were no borders tonight, only pack. Rowan felt him before she heard him. The bond humming warm and content, a living ribbon braided around both their hearts. Dante came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist, chin settling on her head like he'd done it 1,000,000 times before. Because he had. "You ready, Luna?" he murmured against her hair, voice low enough that only she heard the slight tremor in it. Rowan smiled, small and fierce. "I was born ready." She turned in his arms, tipped her head back, and kissed him. Slow, deliberate, right there where every wolf could see. No one looked away. Some cheered, some howled. A few wiped tears and pretended they weren't. When she pulled back, Dante's eyes were pure molten gold. Rowan faced the packs again. Her voice carried across the ridge, clear and steady as sunrise. 1 year ago, I stood in a circle of blood and stone and told you the world would change or it would burn. She let the silence settle. Tonight, we run together. Silver Fang, Iron Hollow. Rogues who chose family over fear. Humans who chose teeth over chains. Her gaze found Cassian in the front line, standing between Maya and Liv, their shoulders touching, 3 claiming marks braided into one bright circle. He met her eyes, calm now, healed in all the ways that mattered, and smiled. Small, real, and bowed low. Rowan inclined her head, gratitude and goodbye in one. No wolf will ever again be forced to claim or be claimed. No human will be stolen in the night. No child will watch their parent die for the crime of choosing themselves. A ripple of agreement rolled through the packs, low growls of assent, raised fists, tails thumping earth. Rowan lifted her arms. Tonight, we run as one pack, one territory, one law, consent, always, in all things. The answering howl started with Dante, deep, resonant, shaking the stones beneath their feet. It spread like wildfire. Every throat opened, every voice rose. The ridge trembled with it. Rowan laughed, wild and free, and let Dante pull her into the tide. They shifted together, seamless now, practiced, perfect. Rowan's wolf was new, born the night she rewrote the bond, sleek black with one silver paw and eyes the color of stormlit gold. Dante's massive black wolf pressed against her side, scar-catching moonlight, pride and devotion pouring through the bond in waves. Side by side, co-alphas, equals chosen, they led the run. The forest opened for them. Wolves poured down the mountainside in a river of fur and joy and teeth and moonlight. Somewhere in the middle, Cassian ran flanked by Maya and Liv, auburn wolves tangled with storm gray. Laughter bright and whole in his mind for the first time in a year. Mara and Elias ran flank to flank with Iron Hollow elders who once would have killed them on sight. Pups nipped at heels. Old wolves kept pace with magic in their bones. And at the front, Rowan and Dante ran like the world had been built for this moment. Hours later, when the moon began its descent, the pack gathered in the wide meadow that had once been no man's land. Rowan shifted back first, standing naked and unashamed under the fading silver light. Dante followed, wrapping a fur around her shoulders before anyone else could look too long. Rowan rolled her eyes but let him. She raised her voice one last time. "This is what freedom smells like," she said simply. The pack roared approval. Later, much later, when the fires were banked low and most wolves slept curled together in piles of limbs and fur, Rowan and Dante walked back to the ridge alone. Dawn painted the sky in rose and gold. Rowan leaned against the same pine that had held her up the night the bond first snapped into place. Dante stood behind her again, arms around her waist, chin on her head, exactly where he belonged. "Think they'll tell stories about us?" he asked, mouth brushing her claiming mark. Rowan smiled, slow and wicked. "They'll tell stories about the human who broke the moon's rules and made better ones." Dante's laugh rumbled against her spine. "And the alpha stupid enough to fall for her?" Rowan turned in his arms, fingers threading through his hair. "They'll say he was smart enough to kneel when it mattered." She kissed him then, soft, morning sweet, tasting forever on his tongue. When they pulled apart, the sun crested the ridge, spilling gold across the new world they'd built. Rowan rested her forehead against his. "I didn't break the bond," she whispered. Dante finished for her, voice rough with love. "You broke the cage." Below them, the united pack stirred and howled once more, greeting the day. Above them, the moon slipped away satisfied, and Rowan Vale, once orphan, once prisoner, once human, now Luna, now legend, stood in the arms of the wolf who had learned to kneel and the man who had learned to rise, and knew without a shred of doubt that every scar had been worth it. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. Soft wind through new leaves, a single raven, black feather glinting red in the sunrise, wheels overhead and flies toward a future wide open. Fade to the sound of paws on fresh earth, running, always running, toward whatever came next. Together, chosen, free,